I knew the day was about to tilt the second a voice snapped behind me at Whole Foods on Peachtree, sharp and smug like a locker slamming shut, telling me to get my hands off that wine lady. And I turned slow with my pink pearls catching that cold store light while two officers squared their shoulders like they owned the air I was breathing. Derek Vaughn with the steroid eyes and Trent Mallory trying not to shake, and before I could even ask what this was, Derek shoved me into a $300 wine rack so bottles burst and red ran like a wound across tile, and I stood there with blood tracing my temple to my pearls, and I said, calm as Sunday school, you just picked the wrong bloodline. They zip-tied my wrists so tight I could feel the bite in the bone announce theft, and resisting like they were reading lines from a script they didn't write but loved performing. And when a teenager named Jamal raised his phone to record, Derek smashed it to glitter on the floor and swung at that boy, like the truth offended him. And as they dragged me out into that breath of cold Atlanta air, I memorized everything the way a teacher does when the room gets loud. Names, badge numbers, the cruiser's plate, the time on the dash, the Buckhead skyline blurring to shoulder, driving down I-85, every exit they took, every turn they cut, with the siren crying that lazy lie of urgency. They didn't book me, like they book people. They slid me through a side door at Fulton County, and the guard at intake said she's not on the list. And Derek handed over a folded note like a cheat sheet with a signature I recognized from TV. Chief Raymond Delgado. The scanner kept rejecting my prints like my name, and their paperwork didn't agree on reality. And when the tech asked if I had medical conditions, I told him only a good memory, and he looked up startled, and then we were moving down a hallway that buzzed with lights that pretended to work, and cameras that pretended to see straight into Block D, where the doors slam heavy like punctuation marks you can't argue with. They sat me on a narrow cot across from a woman with weathered eyes clutching a blanket like a promise, Marlene whispering 7 times under her breath. 7 for nothing. Same bench, same charge, same officers, Officer T. Mallory, because I make easy paperwork, and I felt that taste you get when a truth you've suspected finally puts its feet on your floor. An hour later, another woman limped in, Tasha rolling her wrist where bruises were blooming, saying the chief's men planted coke to balance numbers because quotas are how grants flow and bonuses smile, and from the vent came a voice like gravel. Officer Hayes used to be one of them, saying Delgado orders the camera wipes after each clean sweep arrest, and a second voice drifted through calm and clipped. Judge Vaughn will sign by dawn 42, moved last quarter. Keep it quiet. And those words landed like nails in wood. $42 million. Judge Clarence Vaughn, an empire hiding in the paperwork and the dark. I tore a strip from my thin sheet, dipped it in the blood at my wrist, and wrote on the wall in a neat hand my students used to tease me about. 42M, clean sweep, Delgado Vaughn, Mallory Derek. Tagging each with a rhythm so it would stick to memory, because when you can't keep paper, they can burn you. Write on what they can't erase without repainting the whole room. Through the hours, the cell became a classroom with a hum that meant more than electricity. Footsteps passing like page turns. Laughter in the hall that sounded like boys daring each other to jump off roofs. And at 3 a.m., a guard's radio crackled. Chief says sunrise order stands. Eliminate the old woman. And I sat up straight, and my anger sharpened into something useful. A tool, not a flame. And I worked a button loose from my coat and scratched 2 words deeper into the concrete under the blood notes. Iron Ledger, because I was done being their secret. When the door opened without ceremony and a woman in a janitor uniform slid in like she belonged to the Walls Cap low badge folded into her sleeve, I recognized a kind of courage I've seen in classrooms and marches and kitchen tables, she whispered. I'm Detective Naomi Brooks. Jamal is my nephew and he's alive. His video synced to the cloud before they broke the phone. It's online, and she put a burner in my hands and said, 1 minute, make it count, so I dialed the only number saved. And when my son answered, Marcus Harper, his voice had that soft edge of a boy who grew into a man on purpose, and I spoke like I was laying down chalk lines on a board. Marcus Block D, 36 hours, Iron Ledger now, and I heard the break in his breath before he shifted into the gear the country knows understood Operation Live in 5. Naomi took the phone and said it clean. Kill order before sunrise. Delgado. Judge Vaughn Mayor Sinclair, 5 years of wipes in Ledger's Control Room C can push a dump to DOJ. And when she handed it back, she said, when you hear 3 bangs, stay low. That's me flipping the alarm to jam doors open, and I told her be careful. And she smiled small because everything's already at risk, you know what I mean? In Washington, Marcus kicked open encrypted channels, and people who wear suits like armor moved with the precision of a lesson that's been rehearsed. 12 agents undercover as defense attorneys headed for the jail, marshals surrounding the police headquarters, the mayor's mansion, and Judge Vaughn's lake property, no leaks, no mercy, all quiet until sunrise. And in Block D, I sat on my cot, back straight hands tied a woman who taught children to read, now teaching grown men what a record sounds like. 3 bangs. Then the alarm wailed and red strobes beat the hallway like a warning heart. Doors clanked and jammed open instead of locking. Radios hissed code that wouldn't save anybody. Smoke crawled low like it had a map, and from outside came that voice through the bullhorn that peeling paint recognizes without asking questions. Federal agents stand down. And in the middle of it all, Hayes appeared at my bars with a ring of keys like a handful of math problems finally solved and said, "Mrs. Harper, time to go," and I told him no one's a priority until we're all free. And he looked at me and nodded once and tapped his radio and said K-Block is a group pull copy, and that was the first breath of clean air I took in 36 hours. Upstairs, Delgado tried to feed a fire with a history he didn't want to survive him, warrants forged and ledgers labeled Clean Sweep and Sinclair Private and church donations that were anything but. And Naomi walked in steady with a recorder and said, "Drop it, Chief." And he laughed and called her washed up and lunged like the smoke belonged to him. And Hayes tackled him and the recorder kept running and a room full of ash heard Delgado's own voice give the kill order for the old woman. Yeah, that happened. Across Atlanta, the dominoes were already falling. At APD headquarters on the 17th floor, cyber teams packaged servers into evidence crates while a room full of glass walls watched their reflections. Look away at the mayor's mansion. Lydia Sinclair in a robe yanked a hidden door behind a wine shelf and tried to haul cases of cash and gold to a private strip before marshals boxed her in and told her not anymore, ma'am. And out on Judge Vaughn's lake, a yacht throttled into a net that rose like a colored pencil line on blue paper as Coast Guard lights painted the water, and the judge shouted jurisdiction like it was a spell that might still work, and it didn't. At dawn, the power came back steady, and helicopters traced circles around Truth, while Block D emptied into air that felt honest for the first time in a long time, and I walked out with Naomi's hand steady near my shoulder and Jamal filming with a repaired camera. And when he asked if he could get my voice, I told him, "Keep recording, son. The truth needs proof." And the city outside the fences sang my name and their own, and it sounded like something bigger than any one of us. The trials weren't fireworks, they were accounting, and they were humbling for reasons that had nothing to do with pride. You sit in a federal courtroom and watch 5 years of secrets turned into exhibits, and the room gets small even when the ceilings are high. You hear Naomi's recording play, Delgado ordering a death like he's calling it a sandwich. You see the judge's signature repeated across 187 fabricated cases. You watch the mayor try to make theft sound like duty, and the jurors sit straight and write notes like students who finally love the subject because it's about their own lives. Pierce, Delgado, tried to make himself a hero again, talked about order and the street and the ugliness he had to tame, and the prosecutor said, "Order without justice is just fear," and the air itself agreed. Judge Vaughn wilted under the light of his own compromises, said debts and pressure as if the words could soften handcuffs, and the prosecutor stood there with the patience of a man holding ledgers in both hands and said, "You meant every signature, and that was that." Mayor Sinclair tried defiance and then pity and then silence, and none of them changed the math. When they called me, I took the oath and told my story plain, what Derek did in that store, what Trent signed for the sake of easy paperwork, what the vents carried when men forgot that air has ears, what blood letters on a concrete wall can hold when files get wiped, what a boy with a phone can do for a city. And one defense lawyer tried to make my age a punchline, and I told him I kept 30 names and 200 scores and 5 learning plans and a lunch schedule in my head for 40 years while breaking up hallway fights and grading essays on the bus. So yes, sir, I remember. And the room laughed because sometimes dignity is the only comedy that makes sense. The verdicts landed like thunder on a blue sky. Life without parole for Delgado, life for Judge Vaughn, 45 years for Mayor Sinclair with no parole. And the headline said Empire Falls, and people sent me letters from towns I've never seen, telling me about their sheriffs and their clerks and their mayors, and I wrote back when I could, and when I couldn't, I planted something in the courtyard of what used to be Block D because people forget the ground needs proof too. The $42 million they laundered out of fear and paperwork did not all come home because thieves are clever, but enough did that. The weight shifted enough to write checks with names on them and amounts that sounded less like apologies and more like acknowledgments, and I signed each letter with a hand that has written thousands of report cards because restitution should carry handwriting, you know what I mean. They tore the jail down to studs and rebuilt it into the Evelyn Harper Community Center, which is a title I did not ask for, but I show up every morning and unlock the door because names mean less than the work. And where solitary used to be, we put a library and the light falls in just so in the afternoon. And you can see the dust look like it forgave us. And on the wall we hung photographs of the 187 men and women who lived inside their math with one line beneath them in bronze, "Truth redeems." And some days the line hits me like a blessing and some days it feels like a dare. Naomi runs the Harper Integrity Unit now, and she stands in front of rooms full of young officers and says, "Write it down. Question the order that sounds too clean. Keep the camera rolling and your conscience louder than your radio." And she hands each graduate a pen that says, "See truth, speak truth." And I have watched the way those words land in a palm and stay there. Jamal grew into his voice and took that video and all the hours that came after and cut it into a film called The Last Witness, and at a small screening full of folding chairs and popcorn, there's a close shot of my pearls catching the light and my voice saying they thought they arrested a grandmother. They woke a city, and you can hear people suck in their breath because testimony does that even on a screen. Marcus built something you can't campaign on because it's not pretty and it's not fast. A civil rights strike force with clipboards and subpoenas and the patience of people who know the fight is in footnotes and file rooms. And they have gone places that thought no one was coming and recovered money that thought it had retired in peace. Months later, a letter arrived from Delgado and I put it in a drawer without opening it because not every story earns an answer and I will let history read it if it wants to, but I don't owe that man my eyes, and if that offends you, well, we can talk about mercy and memory and how both have rules. You want the open ending, fine. Systems don't vanish when you change the locks. They test the hinges. They look for the next quiet hallway. And I tell my students on Tuesday nights during public speaking that the work is to keep paying attention louder than they lie, to write names and times and plate numbers to film, when your hand shakes, and upload when your phone breaks, to tell your mother, your pastor, your neighbor, to tell the kid at the bus stop who catches everything, because that kid might save a life. Some mornings I sit on a bench outside the center and watch sunflowers that have no business surviving in a city courtyard. Reach anyway, tall and stubborn. And I think about that line I told Derek in the market with wine on the floor and glass in my hair. You just picked the wrong bloodline. And I smile because it wasn't about my son's title. It was about the lesson he learned at my table and took to Washington. Justice is memory put to work. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments what you think justice really is, punishment or memory or both. Tell me where you've seen power hide behind a rule book and whether you spoke up or kept your head down. Tell me if you would have hit record like Jamal, or if you've been that person already, and what happened next. Push back. If you think I was wrong to refuse a private rescue until everyone on K-Block walked out, argue with me about mercy and that unopened letter. And if you want more stories that don't shout but don't flinch, hit like, subscribe, share this with someone who thinks one voice can't move a city, because I'm here to tell you, it can, and when it does, it sounds like a classroom bell that never rings because the lesson isn't over yet.